Okay, so we are going to go ahead and get started. And once again, good afternoon. My name is Tara Kelly. I am one of the patent consultants here in the Eastern region. I sit on the Deaf Hard of Hearing Initiative, as well as the Deaf Blind and the Family Engagement Initiatives. And with me today is my forever wing woman, my colleague, Sue Ann Hauser, and I'll let Sue Ann introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Sue Ann Hauser, and I am out of the Central Region for any of you who don't know, and I'm just thrilled to be here with you today.
Thank you so much, Sue Ann. So today we have a really wonderful session planned for all of you. We are going to be looking at taking the leap, moving from classroom or itinerancy, as the case may be, into administration. And today we have a really wonderful group of deaf hard of hearing practitioners who have all started out at different areas in the field and have become supervisors and administrators. So I will let them introduce themselves to you when we begin our discussion. But today we have Christy Heyergeist, who is with us from DCIU, Adam Buck, who is with us from the School District of Philadelphia, Jill Christopher, who is with us from MCIU, and Jennifer Peering, who is with us from Allegheny Intermediate Unit. So we will go ahead and get started. And what I'm going to ask, just to make it a little bit easier for our deaf hard of hearing participants today, I am actually going to ask the question, and then when the first person begins answering, if the rest of us could turn off our videos, that way we have the spotlight on the person who's answering, as well as our interpreter, and I will make sure that we are spotlighting and unspotlighting appropriately. So the first question today is a pretty basic question. How did you get involved with deaf education, and what brought you to supervision and administration? And if you needed some extra education to become an administrator, we'd love to hear about that as well. So I'm going to ask Jill Christopher from MCIU to be the first person to answer that question for us.
Thanks, Tara. Hi, I'm Jill Christopher from Montgomery County IU. My beginning and start of deaf education probably goes back to when I was in elementary school, and that's where my interest in deaf education started. I had a teacher in third grade who taught us sign language, and that kind of sparked my interest in that side of things. And then I always wanted to be a teacher. So when I was doing some job exploration in high school, my mom said, you know, why don't you go look and see if you can go to a classroom with deaf and hard of hearing children, since you know some sign language, that might be something different. So I did, and I fell in love, and I knew that that's what I wanted to do. So I went on and became a teacher of the deaf and worked in a variety of settings for about 16 years. I did early intervention. I worked at a therapeutic treatment program for deaf and hard of for deaf students who use ASL, schools for the deaf, and itinerant in public schools. And so I had a nice variety of different settings and with different communication modalities. So a few years ago, I had a supervisor who was going to be leaving her position and who said, you know, you might want to consider jumping into administration. You have a pretty good background, and I just love what I do, and I wanted to continue to be a part of this in a new way. So I took her advice and applied for the opportunity to do this. And I had to go and concurrently get my supervisor of special ed certification while I was working in the position. Fortunately, our organization was very supportive of me doing that. So that was my experience in how I became a supervisor.
Excellent, Jill. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you sharing that with all of us. And now I'll ask Christy Heyergeist from DCIU to please share her experience.
Hi, everyone. My background is similar to Jill's in that I took a signing class in high school. I always wanted to be a teacher, never wanted to teach a large group of children, thought deaf education was the way to go. I have a bachelor's degree in deaf education that I got from Indiana University of Pennsylvania. I then moved to Southern Maryland, taught there for 4 years, then moved to the Philadelphia area where I reside now in Delaware County, IU. I had a supervisor who encouraged me to go back to school and get my master's degree in speech language pathology. The DCIU is primarily an oral program, and I was working with birth to 3 and early intervention students at the time. There are 2 cochlear implant centers here. I really needed to learn a lot more about language development. So I went back and got a master's degree from LaSalle University in speech language pathology. And then the same supervisor told me I should get my supervisory degree. So I listened to her again and ended up with a supervisor of special education. I did that at Penn State. And I did that 15 years ago and never wanted to be a supervisor. I think did it because I was told, and it moved me up on the pay scale, honestly. So I thought that sounds like a good idea. But here I am. I've now been the supervisor for 2.5 years here at the DCIU, most of it during COVID time. So I'm not sure that I've still really gotten the full scope of what it actually looks like, but I don't have any regrets. So here I am.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Christy, for sharing your experience with us. Now we'll ask Jennifer Peering from AIU to share her experience.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jennifer Peering. I am from the Allegheny Intermediate Unit out here in the suburbs of Pittsburgh. And my avenue into the AIU in an administrative capacity, sort of similar to those who've already spoken. I began some interest in education, special education, high school, started out at Kent State University in their special education program to become an educator, transitioned into the deaf, hard of hearing aspect of things, started taking some sign language, and was on track to get certification to be a teacher of the deaf, and then was very happy and excited to find that there was an interpreting program and immediately fell in love with it and kind of changed tracks, stayed an extra year, for which my parents were always grateful financially for me to do that. And I got my bachelor's in educational interpreting. At that time, Kent State's program was specifically for interpreters working in K-12. So I worked a little bit in Ohio. I worked a couple years in Virginia and then back to Pennsylvania. And I worked as an interpreter in the classroom for about 5 years. And like those who have already spoken, I also had a mentor who happened to be my current supervisor, who sort of drafted me to take her position, knowing that she was going to be taking a new opportunity outside of the IU. And as I shared with those on the call last week, I distinctly remember saying I did not want to do that. But after some mentoring with her and really starting to understand what the position was for, that would be supporting interpreters and students, decided that that was an opportunity that I wanted to take up. So the capacity of that administrative role at the IU didn't at that point in time require me to have any further education. So I took that administrative role, supervising directly the interpreters and working alongside our supervisor for teachers of the deaf and supporting our teachers as well. At one point in time over the last 6 or so years, the IU restructured a bit, and we now have our programs for students who are deaf and hard of hearing and students who are blind and visually impaired as one kind of low incidence program. And so with that new need to learn some more, I went back and got my certification as a teacher of students who are visually impaired, and have been dabbling in supporting students with deaf blindness. And now that my role is continuing to evolve with more direct work and support with our teachers, I'm actually finishing up soon my principal certification and hoping to continue with the programs at the IU in that capacity after that.
Excellent, Jen. Thank you so much for sharing with us a little bit more about how you came to the field as somebody who actually has worked as an educational interpreter, but was also interested in supervision and administration, and then also adding teaching certification on top of that. So that's really impressive to have all of those different areas in your toolkit. And last but never least, we are going to ask Adam Buck to please join us to share his experience with working in the School District of Philadelphia.
So good afternoon, everyone. As Tara said, I am from the School District of Philadelphia, not to be confused with everything else in the state that goes by IUs. The School District of Philadelphia, because it's so large, is its own IU, so we're also IU 26, for those of you that know numbers, but we refer to ourselves as the School District of Philadelphia. So my trajectory to where I am today actually started, over 25 years ago when I was in high school. I actually took sign language as an elective, liked it, moved on right from high school to the interpreter training program at Community College of Philadelphia, got my associates in interpreting, had worked in educational interpreting for a little bit, went back, got a bachelor's in interpreting, continued in educational interpreting. I was an educational interpreter for 15 years or so. Went back again, as Jen and some of my other colleagues had mentioned, where I also had a director at that time that had encouraged me to think about what next steps would be professionally. So I also have a master's in education. I do have my CICT and Ed K-12 cert. So the way things are structured here in the School District of Philadelphia is I'm the coordinator for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing program, but I work alongside with the special ed directors that support academics or legal, depending on what area needs support. So it's a little differently structured, just because our district and program is pretty big. But yeah, so that's where we are today. I've often thought about going back again, as Jen and again my other colleagues are, but right now I am still getting my sea legs, so to speak, in this current position, because I started 3 or so years ago. So half of that time has been COVID, and we've been obviously not physically in a building. We are now back in a building. So as Christy said, you know, I'm still learning a lot, but have learned a lot. So, and that's it for this question.
So Adam, I'm actually not going to let you get away quite so quickly because you started to answer the next question just because by virtue of where you work, which the question is, administrative positions can look a little bit different just depending upon the type of program in which you work. And you did talk a little bit about the type of program you work in and a little bit about the scope of your current role. The other thing I would ask you about that in terms of the scope of your role, has there been anything that surprised you about becoming an administrator, about your role?
I am still continually surprised every moment of the day. Flexibility, as we know, as we talk about in educational interpreting or in education in general, is key. Being in a supervisory coordinator administrative role, definitely flexibility. I think the thing that has surprised me the most are the things that get thrown at me that have nothing to do with deaf ed, but because I'm in a coordinator position, a lot gets thrown at us. So it does sometimes distract where other tasks are given to you as a priority just by nature of the office that I work in. My office is Office of Specialized Services, so everything and anything special ed comes to us. So oftentimes you might get pulled to support colleagues in another area that is not your area of expertise or knowledge base, but because in the role that you currently reside in, just by default, you know, we have to become a jack of all trades very quickly. So what do we say in interpreting, right? A jack of all trades, master of none. So sometimes I feel like that is definitely my day-to-day living with the School District of Philadelphia.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Adam. I think those of us who have been in a supervisory or an administrative role can definitely relate to that need for flexibility and just having to go with the flow on any given day. So that's a great point. And I'm going to ask Jill Christopher from MCIU. Jill, if you would like to come on camera and be able to give us a little bit more information about the type of program that you supervise and the scope of your role there at MCIU 23. And then also, has there been anything really surprising to you about becoming an administrator?
So my position at the MCIU includes supervising the hearing program, but also the vision program. So I think similar to Jen's position, we have like a sensory group. So the hearing program has 9 itinerants, and we have 3 classroom programs in elementary, middle school, and high school hearing support supplemental level classroom program. We have 2 full-time educational audiologists. We have some support staff, some teaching assistants, a captionist on staff in our program. So we have a pretty robust program. We have an early intervention program at the IU, but that is a separate group. So that's the one group that I don't get to see quite as much. I'm trying to think, the question was, oh, what surprised me? So I guess it's just the variability of what you encounter day to day. I feel like when I was in the teaching role, you kind of went through and you knew what was to be expected. That doesn't mean that things didn't pop up all the time, because they do. And you have to be ready to pivot on a moment's notice with your students. But the things that come at the administrative level are definitely different. And you're always learning. I feel like there's some things I can answer right away, and there's some things I still have to go and seek some help for. So, just always being ready and knowing where to go for help when you need it. I think it's similar to when you're a teacher, but I am surprised day to day by different things that come across my desk.
Yeah, the variability in these types of positions is definitely something that seems to be consistent across programs, regardless of the type of program, that's for sure. So thanks so much, Jill, for giving us that feedback on what your position's like. And now I'm going to ask Jennifer Peering to come back on camera to share her experience with becoming an administrator and the scope of her role, and then also if anything surprised you, Jen.
Sure. So as Jill said, our programs are similar in that we support students who are both under deaf, hard of hearing, and blind, visually impaired. So we have at our IU 23 teachers of the visually impaired, 18 teachers of the deaf, 3 educational audiologists, and about 15 educational interpreters. So we're in all of the suburbs of Allegheny County, so 42 different school districts. And I think that with that said, right, I think one of the things that surprised me the most was that variability that Tara talked about, but also the opportunity to make connections across districts and support people in a way that they don't feel so isolated out where they work. So I think, I always kind of felt like I was out on my own. And then when I got to see the big scope of the big picture, right, of what was just in our catchment area, it's been a good opportunity for me to think about how we can create some collaboration and really help teachers feel like they're part of a big group, because with IUs that sometimes is really difficult. And knowing how that felt being out in the field and then being able to come in and see how can we improve on that. I guess it wasn't surprising, but it was a nice thing to be able to see that it wasn't just me, it wasn't just our program, but really that's what administrators are trying to do, is build capacity and community and really support a group of practitioners to become, a group that can work together. So that was a nice flip of what I experienced prior to, and then getting into more of an administrative role. And then, of course, all the fires that you put out every day. Somebody said to me very early on, do you just run around and put out fires all day? And I said, some days. But sometimes the fires are good fires and I don't put them out, and we're able to light some, empower some folks to take on some leadership roles too. So good surprises are out there as well.
Absolutely. I think it's wonderful that you hit on the point about being able to support others in their role and making them feel as though they are more a part of something bigger and a part of the group. Definitely, Jen. And then finally, if I could ask Christy to come back on camera to be able to share her experience with the scope of her role in her program. And then also if there's been anything that surprised you about becoming an administrator.
Sure. Thanks, Tara. So my program is similar, but yet includes a language component that I supervise. As a speech pathologist, it is helpful that I'm able to work with our teachers that have students that have severe language disabilities. We have 3 classrooms throughout Delaware County that we support students whose needs. It's a supplemental level classroom, but it is taught by speech language pathologists. And then I supervise the hearing program, birth to 3 early intervention, and our school age program. We have 5 classroom-based supplemental level classrooms, and then we have 5 itinerant teachers, 2 educational audiologists, and we support 15 school districts within Delaware County. I think the most surprising part about becoming an administrator for me, and I'm still relatively new to this role, is that I had this idea that supervisors, when I was a teacher, that they knew the answers to everything and that there was an answer to everything. And what I've really come to find out is that it really, sometimes you have to, as Jill was saying, go to other people for help. Things are not really that black and white. Even educational law, that districts interpret things differently. The supports that people offer are really different. So I think that's probably one of the things that surprised me the most. I just had this idea in my head that if you were faced with the scenario, this was the answer, and that the supervisors knew those answers. But it is not that black and white, and there are variability to the way different districts respond to things, the way different school districts. So I think that has been the biggest surprise to me.
Christy, I love that you said that, because it actually directly leads us into one of our other questions for this afternoon, which is that, there are a lot of thoughts and frankly, I think some misconceptions, as you said, around what administrators do and in some instances don't do. And in your view, I mean, you mentioned the misconception about, thinking that the supervisor kind of had all of the answers about things. Have you come across any other misconceptions about either your role specifically or just about administration as a field?
Sure, it is. I've been able to be more hands-on than I thought that I would. And although my predecessor was definitely hands-on, I'm still able to, I had a teacher over here today and we were trying to figure out, the best test to give for a student who was up for re-eval. So I'm still more hands-on, and I don't think I realized, that actually could happen, at that level, looking at assessments and trying to help teachers figure out what to do with a student that's giving them, not performing the way that they think or making the progress. So that has been, I was worried about not being able, when I decided to take this role, I was worried about not being able to see the students and not having an interaction with the students and all. So I have to schedule it, and that has been the hardest part. I definitely have to schedule that into my calendar, but I am still able to see students when they come into the audiology booth that is at our center where my office is. I try to meet the families and at least maintain some of those relationships with the families and students. So I think the idea that the supervisor is, attending meetings and, looking at problems all day long isn't necessarily the case, but you do have to schedule it into your calendar.
That is a fantastic point, Christy, because I know that is a fear that's been expressed when I've talked with staff in the past about possibly moving into supervisory or administrative roles, is that disconnect from our students and our families. And, that's a big piece of why we do what we do. So I think it's wonderful to hear that in certain administrative roles, it's, not beyond the scope of the work to be able to still have those connections. I think that's really important. So now I'm going to ask if we'll have Adam come back on camera. And Adam, we're going to ask you, what are some of the misconceptions that you've come across in becoming an administrator in terms of the misconceptions that people might have about your specific role or job, or even just about administration as a field?
Well, I think as some of my colleagues have already answered, because you're in this position does not mean that you know or have an answer to everything, right? So I think part of being a good leader and a coordinator is to not say that I know the answers, but if I don't, I know who to go to get the answers. Thankfully, I work with some absolutely amazing colleagues who are very supportive in that role. But yeah, I think the misconception is just because you're in that position and the title that you hold, then the whole weight of the program or everything falls on your shoulders. So as we know, it's not a one-man show or one-person show. It takes a staff to do what we do to make sure that we're providing the best services we can for our deaf and hard of hearing students. Any more you want me to add?
No, I mean, I think that's, that's right on the money, because I know I had that same misconception before I went into administration, as I thought that they had all the answers and could, figure out all of the problems. And really it's something where we have to collaborate and we have to be able to, as you said, think flexibly and take each day as it comes to look at the challenges that are there. So thank you for being able to, kind of help us reflect on that for sure.
Also, if I could just add,
sorry, no, please.
Sarah, sorry. I work with some absolutely amazing deaf, hard of hearing staff. So I have 28 TODs, 30 interpreters, signing assistants. I also know where their strong suits are. So when situations do come up, I feel very strongly to help collaborate and build them up too, and learn from them. It's not just me teaching. I'm also in a position that I'm always learning each day. So the fact that I have some that are stronger with LS communications, more ASL, depending on what the students' needs are, because we have that wide range of communication and educational needs, I think it's important also to tap into the resources that are right there within my staff.
Absolutely. I mean, so few of us work in programs where we have the luxury of doing only just one thing, right? I mean, most of our students have a wide range of needs. So being able to call on our colleagues and collaborate, and like you say, we're always still learning. I don't think there's been a single day for most of us in this field where we haven't learned something new or been able to get a new strategy or a new perspective on something from a colleague. So I think that's a really important point, Adam. Thank you. So I'm going to ask Jill to come back on camera. And Jill, if I can, I'm actually going to move on to the next question, which is, we've heard a lot about some of the good things that come with moving into an administrative role, being able to support our staff, being able to support our students. What are some of the challenges that you've had in becoming an administrator in your role? And have you found any specific resources or supports that have helped you to meet those challenges?
So I think a challenge for me would be kind of the balance of, we know what we want to do for best practice with supporting the teachers, the students, the school districts. And sometimes you have to implement a little bit of diplomacy in our role. There is compromise at times, and it's a challenge sometimes to take your personal feelings and what I may or a teacher might feel as what's best, and work collaboratively with another professional who might see things differently, and coming to a middle ground and trying to coordinate with them to land on decisions that are going to be of benefit to the students that we're supporting and the families that we're supporting. And I think that's what was a challenge for me, and I still am challenged by that. When you need to really like die on a hill, so to say, and then when not to, like, you need to know how to pick your battles and kind of look at things from different perspectives and come to some decisions that can be very difficult.
Yeah, I think that is one of the things with administration that, there are a lot of really difficult decisions that need to be made. And sometimes it's not always the best decision. You're making the better of two decisions that might not be perfect. And I think that's a really important point. So thanks for your honesty on that. I know it's not always easy. I'm going to ask Christy if you would come back on camera and share with us what are some of the challenges you've encountered, especially being somebody newer to administration. And have you found any specific resources or supports that have really been helpful to you?
Sure. I think the challenges for me have probably been a lot because I am an administrator in the same program that I worked in for almost 20 years, and then I became the administrator. So I feel that my situation is, somewhat unique in that. So I know the program really well. I know I still know all the students really well, but the challenges, I don't know about our budgeting that well. I don't know some of the ways that, the larger organization does things. So I've had a real learning curve with that. An additional challenge has been that, a lot of the people that I now supervise were, my colleagues, my peers. So I know a lot of them as friends. We would text. I know their kids. So there's been a little bit of a challenge in that. I also have been, I guess, somewhat surprised that I've worked alongside people, but you really know somebody when you're supervising them. So I've been a little surprised that, some people don't do things the way that I thought they did them, or so that's been a little bit of a challenge. One of the ways to overcome that, though, is that I think it's been really nice to collaborate. Jill and I actually used to work together. So now as supervisors, I've been able to call on her to look out to other people for support, other supervisors. So that's been, one of the ways to overcome some of the challenges, especially, they're also unique to the situation that you're in. But I think, reaching out to other people, admitting you don't know. I ask the woman in the business office the same questions probably every month. Like, I'm learning all this new vocabulary, how to encumber and do things I didn't know anything about. So not being afraid to be vulnerable and just ask the questions, I think helps.
Yeah, that point about vulnerability, I think, is a huge one because, again, when you move into a new role, just like any other, there's a learning curve. I mean, you could be the most well-prepared person to move into administration ever. And until you're actually hitting the ground and doing the job, it's hard to really kind of find that rhythm and flow of things, for sure. So I think that's a really important point that, no matter what type of program you're working in, you're going to need to know how to reach out to those resources and how to ask for help. So I'm really glad that you shared that, because I think for some people who are considering maybe making this move, they do have that kind of fear that what happens if I get into the role and I'm not sure what to do. So that's a really great point, Christy. Thanks for sharing that. Now I will ask if Jennifer Peering would come back on camera. And Jen, would you share with us any of the challenges that you've encountered moving into your role?
Sure. I think one of the biggest challenges that I faced early on and still do is time, but with everyone, right? In all jobs, time is a struggle. But feeling like you want more time to be with people, right? So not mismanaging time or not even necessarily having enough time in a given day, but really just wanting to spend some meaningful time with students and with teachers. And sometimes there's other responsibilities that go along with the job and the role that you have to get to that, you know, doesn't allow you to spend that quality time doing the things that we all love to do in the classroom, right? Which is why some folks are hesitant to make the leap. With that said, though, I think that being able to carve out that time, and I think it was Christy who said that, you know, and schedule that in. I know I can say I have the flexibility that there are some days if I need a sub for an interpreter, I say, I'm going to go be that sub because I need to get back out and I need to be with kiddos. And that always makes me, you know, kind of resets why I'm doing what I'm doing and re-energizes me. So again, it's just kind of making that time to be focused on the things that are important and not kind of getting bogged down in the minutia of some of those administrative tasks. The other challenge that I know, I became the interpreter supervisor when I had only been in the field for about 4 or 5 years. I was fairly young. I think I was 25 when I got the job. And one of the challenges for me was having some, you know, real talk conversations, personnel type situations, just not something that I had encountered as an interpreter or, you know, that one might have as an educator, where you have to have some difficult conversations sometimes with employees about what they're doing or not doing. And it can be awkward, right, when you're first getting into it, but listening to how others do it, leaning on others, having those relationships with people who are your role-alikes is a really great way to have conversation about what, you know, things that happen and talk through it and model for each other and learn from each other. And I will say, I'll give a shout out to Patton. The supervisors meetings that we have twice a year and then the retreat have been so beneficial to establish such a great network in Pennsylvania for people in those role-alike positions, right? So Jill and I met Christy the other day, and Adam and I know each other from some things. So even being able to reach out to people from all over and say, you know, how do you do this, or how would you handle this, and hearing from each other, that network of like administrators has really been invaluable. And I feel like it's grown the last few years significantly, and that's really been a great resource for me.
I couldn't be more thrilled to hear you say that, Jen, because as you know, I came to Pennsylvania from a smaller state that did not have the type of infrastructure that Pennsylvania has. It did not have an organization like Patton. And so it was really very much catch as catch can when it came to having those connections with other supervisors and being able to really collaborate and sort of thought partner with one another around some of these issues that come up. So yeah, I absolutely agree. I think it's invaluable to be able to have these connections, whether it's with a supervisor, you know, just down the road from you at a different district or a different LEA, or whether it's across the state with a supervisor who might have a similar background or might supervise a similar type of program. So I think that's a really good point.
Well, and I will add, it truly, Tara, I think that when I think about the folks who are on the call right now, and maybe you're thinking about making the jump or preparing to make the jump at some point, I do feel like administrators are supported as much, if not more so, or, you know, at least as much as educators by the department and by Patton. There really is a structure to it. And I think as long as you're in an administrative role and you take advantage of those resources, there is just so much to support you in your role.
Absolutely. That's, I think it's very true. And again, Pennsylvania, I think does stand out amongst the states for just having a lot of support programs and a lot of just different types of conferences and meetings and PLCs that are available for supervisors and administrators. And you don't always find that in other states. So I think that is a really great point. And now I will ask Adam if he would please rejoin us. And Adam, once again, I am going to make life slightly more difficult for you, my friend. I am going to ask you to please share with us a challenge maybe that you've encountered in becoming an administrator, but then I'm also going to ask you to share what's your favorite part of your job and what makes it worth it for you.
Well, I definitely have to agree with my colleague, Jennifer. Time is definitely the challenge. I think as all of us, Jill, Christy, and Jennifer can say without doubt, the things that are thrown at us and the things that are on our to-do list never stops, and it just continues to grow. So that time management piece, I think, is most challenging. When you were in a classroom, whether that was a role of a TOD or an interpreter, most of your time was dictated to you by a school, a bell schedule, right? You would follow it, you would know exactly where you needed to be at that time, at that period. Being on the other side of the fence, there's a lot of things that are getting thrown at us, and we're getting tagged and tapped to help support. So the time management is definitely a challenge, but I would also say that the most rewarding is the students. Because I've been in a classroom position and now in this position as coordinator, most of the students that I have either interpreted for or worked with, I've known since kindergarten. I just had an opportunity last week to meet with a student that I used to interpret for in kindergarten and now is a junior in high school, and seeing how he has matured and is able to present himself just makes my heart so happy. So I take as many opportunities as I can to visit our programs across the district and just spend time in the classroom with the TODs, my interpreters, and the students to see how they're doing. And that's really what gives me the motivation to keep pushing me forward, because that's why we fight at the at the administration end for our kids, and that's really what it's about.
Yeah, there is definitely something really special. And I don't want to say it's just deaf, hard of hearing, because I know that there are some other areas of special education that enjoy this as well. But I agree with you, Adam, being able to see our kids when they're little and then getting to revisit with them as they get older is something really special, because I feel like not everybody in education gets to do that in our capacity. And it is something that, I know for me has been just such a rewarding aspect of the job over the years, whether it's been as a teacher or as an administrator. Being able to kind of pick up again with students down the line and see their growth is really exciting. So I agree, definitely. Thank you so much for sharing that. Jill Christopher, I'm going to ask you to please come back on camera. And if you could share with us, what is your favorite part of your job and what makes it worth it for you?
I think the favorite part of my job is, besides getting to meet so many people, and Jen really brought up a great point, our opportunity to network, not just across the state, but just generally, because we're such a very small, close-knit field. It has been, I've had more opportunities in this role than I think I ever did as a teacher. So I really love that chance to meet all of these amazing professionals and collaborate with them. But one of the rewarding things is just being able to have the opportunities to be proactive and do new things. Just being in a position that you can actually make some change. And I think even as a teacher, that's also because that's where the think tank is too. Talking with your supervisor and with these great ideas that come up, and being able to bring them to fruition. And I definitely, things that we've done over the past few years, I definitely did not do it alone. I did it with the support of our amazing teachers and my colleagues in other supervisor roles, like just talking through different scenarios with them. So I really just love the new innovative things that we're working on. Educational audiology has been a big area of growth in our area. Promoting that and the importance of having that as part of the students' educational team has been something we've been working a lot on. And just, you know, being able to forward, push our field forward and make it better is a huge reward.
And Jill, I'm not going to let you get away quite that easily. If you could give a piece of advice to anybody who might be interested in possibly pursuing an administrative position in the future, what piece of advice would you give to them?
I would say, don't just go for it. Don't let your doubts, your self-doubt, your hesitation keep you from doing it. It almost got me. I really was hesitant to make the leap myself. And I don't regret it at all. There were days I did, but I'm finally feeling like this is my purpose. And I really I'm really enjoying this position. And if I didn't just give that a chance, you're never locked into anything. It you know, what does it hurt to, you know, go get that extra schooling. If your organization provides some type of tuition reimbursement, take advantage of that. It aligns with your job. So, you know, hopefully that would be something that would be afforded to you. And just do it.
Awesome. Thanks, Jill. And now I'm going to ask Christy to please come back on camera. And Christy, I'm going to ask you both if you have had a specific challenge in moving into your role, although I think you've done a pretty great job of being really honest and upfront with us about sharing some of the challenges you've had, especially as somebody who's newer to administration and during COVID, no doubt. I mean, that's a challenge all in and of itself. But then in addition to sharing a challenge, if you could give us a piece of advice that you'd like to share with anybody considering becoming an administrator.
Sure. I think, you know, that one of the challenges was, you know, as a teacher, I felt, you know, I was finally at the point in my career where I felt like I knew what I was doing. I felt like I was, you know, making a difference. And then I move into the role of supervision and I feel like I know nothing. I didn't know a lot of the business side of it. And I had gotten the supervisory certificate so long before I actually became a supervisor. So there were things I needed to refresh my, you know, my memory on in terms of just simple educational law. But so it's been challenging, but it's fine. Like Jill said, like, you know, I just do it. I don't know that I could have gone back to being a teacher, I suppose, but I think the biggest reason, if you're even questioning like, oh, should I do this or would I ever want to, you know, be a supervisor? I didn't think that I did, but what encouraged me the most to, I think, actually apply for the job was the fear of what would happen if I didn't. And I felt like our department was so strong and we had worked so hard to achieve certain things. And for me, the fear of somebody coming in like a generalist, not really understanding the unique needs that deaf and hard of hearing children have. Students' needs are completely different than just a student, you know, in a regular special ed type of setting. So that fear, I think, really pushed me over the edge of, all right, I might as well try it. I can always get out of it if I hate it. But I just think that our field really needs people that understand the unique needs of students with hearing loss, the technology they use, the ways in which they access curriculum. And there's nobody better to do that than somebody that has the scope of understanding that those of you that are in the field do. So.
That is a fantastic reason for going into administration. And I know it is often shared by many of us in the field. I had a conversation the other day with a colleague, and we were reminiscing about how many of our supervisors over the years in itinerant programs had had true backgrounds in deaf, hard of hearing, or working with students who are deafblind. Very few had that background. So I think anything that we can do to get some of our wonderful deaf, hard of hearing practitioners to even give consideration to moving into supervision and administration is something really positive for our students and their families. So thanks for sharing that, Christy. I am going to ask Jennifer Peering if she would come back on camera. And Jen, if you would share with us, if you had to give your best advice to anybody considering making this transition, what would you be able to share? Oop, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, the first word of advice would be to not mute yourself. I echo Christy's thoughts for sure. I can remember, having that same thought in terms of leadership, right? Who do we want to see in leadership roles who are impacting education for the students that we work with? And we do want to maintain that the level of awareness that the supervisor, the administrator of the program knows the population of students that they're overseeing. And so I think that, if you've ever caught yourself saying, well, they just don't get it. Well, we do. So take the leap, right? Be the person who gets it. And I would say also, we're educators, we're learners, we want to keep to grow our skills. So if you're even thinking about it, starting down that path, taking a class or two, seeing if it's your cup of tea, starting early is a good thing, because then you always kind of have that in your back pocket, and if an opportunity presents itself, that part of the process, you've kind of already started, and you might find that you like it more than you thought you would. So I would say, vote early and vote often, right? Have your voice be part of the change, and start your path early on so that you're ready to make that leap whenever it presents itself to you.
I definitely like the advice of being prepared, because you just never know when that opportunity might come along. So that's terrific advice, Jen. Thank you so much.
It sounds like for all of us, somebody said, here you go.
Yep. And you never know when that moment might be coming. And again, last but not least, we'll ask Adam to close us out with our round of questions. And Adam, if you could give one piece of great advice to anybody who's considering this transition, what would you share?
I think the best advice that I had to learn quick and fast for me is the knowledge and base that I came into this position with is not the knowledge and base that I currently have. So I know for me, my obviously background and training is as an educational interpreter. So educational interpreting and interpreting in general, the philosophies and pedagogical approaches are very linguistically and culturally focused, versus the education world where, we are looking at language, hearing, degree of hearing, how much auditory access they have. So it was, for me, the challenge was not to be pigeonholed in only what I knew as an interpreter, but now with my other degree and other information, that's where I had to look at, I'm now responsible for making sure all of these kids, no matter what degree of hearing loss, no matter what if they sign or don't sign, that are there making the progress, and we're implementing the best program for them. So that was really the strongest challenge for me, is to keep that open mind. And that's what I would say to anyone else looking to make that jump is, yes, go get the advanced degree, continue your education, but keep an open mind and know that the needs of our students are vastly changing. And, it's such an exciting time to be able to be part of their educational progress.
And that's a terrific point too, Adam, because really at the end of the day, we are here to serve our students, and our students come in just all different varieties with all different types of needs and backgrounds and experiences and communication modalities. And I think that's definitely part of what makes our jobs so challenging, but also part of what makes our jobs so exciting, for sure. So now what we would like to do is we would like to open the floor up to all of you. Do you have any questions for any of our panelists today regarding their experiences, regarding administration, anything that's been on your mind? And we would love to have them have the opportunity to answer your questions. You are welcome to use the Q&A. You are welcome to put the questions in the chat, whichever is easiest. And while we wait to see if there are any questions, we are going to share just a couple of links, a little shameless plug from our patent initiatives here. My colleague Sue Ann is sharing the link to the Patent Special Education Leadership Initiative in the chat. And for those who are unfamiliar, the Special Education Leadership Initiative is one of the initiatives at Patent that specifically focuses on its supervision and administration, its developing leadership. Within that initiative, they have a special fellowship for newer supervisors of special education programs, and it's the PFP, the Pennsylvania Fellowship Program. There's also another program for individuals who supervise site-based programs called PIL, the Pennsylvania Inspired Leadership Program, for anybody who might be interested in possibly supervising a site-based program. But either way, you can absolutely look at the patent website and get more information about those programs, because again, we're fortunate in Pennsylvania to have this infrastructure with all this support. And I do see a question in the chat from Erin. She's asking, can you please repeat where you got your supervisory and administrator training and certifications in Pennsylvania? And team, I will ask you all to go ahead, and you are welcome to turn your cameras on and unmute yourselves and share where you got your certifications and your training. Oop, Christy, would you like to go first?
Sure, I'll share. I did mine through Penn State. At the time, I did mine probably 15 years ago. There was a in-person component. I believe it's all virtual now, but I did do mine at Penn State.
Okay, how about you, Jill?
I also did mine at Penn State. There is a supervisor of special education certification, and mine was fully online.
How about you, Adam?
So I don't have my supervisory cert in special ed, but I do have my advanced degree, and it was all through online as well through Holy Family University, which is a local university in Philadelphia.
Tara, can I just add that it was only 18 credits when I did it, and then there was a praxis test. So the I already had my level 2 certificate in Pennsylvania as a teacher, and then this was just an additional praxis to add on to that teacher certification, I suppose.
Okay, that's good to know, Christy. How about you, Jen?
I actually forgot to mention this, but I did an interpreter supervision certificate through the University of Northern Colorado through their Do It Center, and I believe that's still a program that's running. So that was particularly just a certificate of how to supervise interpreters, not a PDE cert, and I'm in the CalU program right now. So it's fully online and it's very similar to what Christy explained.
Great, wonderful. And I see a question in the Q&A from Nari. What education or additional certifications do you recommend for moving into administration? what I will tell you about that is that it's always good to check the Department of Education website for the most recent updated guidance on certifications. Generally, for programs of deaf, hard of hearing in our state, you can have either a supervisor of special education certificate or a principal certificate to supervise either. Although it's usually recommended, depending on the background, to opt for the special education supervisor certificate, but they will accept a principal certificate as well in most instances. And then finally, I do see a question from Jennifer just as we're finishing up, and I will put the survey code in the chat. Jennifer is sharing that she's finished the coursework for educational leadership for her principal certificate, but she's a little bit nervous about taking the SLLA exam. Any tips for studying for that assessment?
I will just say, I believe that the supervisory praxis test is the same one for principals, supervisors of special ed, and superintendent certifications. So they kind of put all of that in one test. And I remember taking this test and thinking, wow, if I had more information on being a principal, I felt like I would have been more prepared. I felt like a lot of the questions were geared towards building principles. So Jennifer, if you have a lot of coursework in that, I feel like you might be a little bit better prepared for that test from your studies. So good luck.
And I will say, as somebody who took a recent praxis by the pretest, right? They're there for a reason. They give you so much to prepare for. And as an adult, whereas whenever I was a young poor student and I said, oh, I don't need that. As an adult, I said, you know what? That's worth the money. And it will help you prepare. Those are really for any certification test, right? So.
Well, thank you all so much again for being with us. Adam Buck from the School District of Philadelphia, Jennifer Peering from Allegheny Intermediate Unit, Christy Heyergeist from Delaware County Intermediate Unit, and Jill Christopher from Montgomery County Intermediate Unit. We can't thank you all enough for being with us. Special thanks to our interpreter, Jesse Lee, for our session today. Many thanks to my wonderful colleague, Sue Ann Hauser, for being our behind the scenes support, and Michael Green from Patent for being our tech support. The code for the survey today, and the link is in the chat, is H as in Harry, D as in David, M as in Mary. Again, the code for the survey is HDM. And thank you all so much again. We look forward to seeing you in March for the next installment of Hour with the Expert. Thanks again.